right. So let's welcome Donna to the virtual stage. Clap your hands, y'all. Hey, Donna. Oh no, we can't hear you. Okay. Donna,
Can you hear me now?
we can hear you now. Thank you.
Great,
Welcome.
great. There's, I think, a little delay. Thank you for that great introduction. And I must also say that I am joined by 5 other amazing designers from the University of Houston. So we are going to share a class that we all were engaged with in spring of 2021. So let me get this going, and there we go. So the students and I were engaged with a class called Design Justice, and these are a few of the comments and the responses the students had to our question, what does a just design curriculum and practice require? So we're here today to talk about how design education can and must transform in light of recent events and engage in a dialogue of what it means to try to create this change and how we can create safe spaces to do it. And I'm sure many of you are not familiar with Houston. So we teach in Houston, which is a very diverse city. I have a lot of these quotes. Sorry, I'm going through them a little quicker. So I'll restart a little bit. So the Design Justice class at the University of Houston College of Architecture and Design. We have 4 students who are going to speak, as well as myself and Susan Rogers, who's another faculty member, associate professor, and the director of the Community Design Resource Center. And we'll make sure and put that in the chat. We also had other faculty in this course, and when we developed the course, we wanted it to be very inclusive. And if you have questions, I know one of the questions that have been asked, how do you reach out? You can certainly always reach out to my email with any questions, and I can direct you to the right person or resources. So we live and work and learn in Houston, Texas. Houston is one of the most diverse cities in this country and is becoming more and more diverse, as is our college and our university. So this is our college looking back at the city. And within our college, it's the College of Architecture and Design. We have 4 major programs: industrial design, architecture, interior architecture, and then the graduate programs. And they are not equal in size. Some of the data points we'll talk about refer to the undergraduate architecture program, which you can see by this graph is the largest by far of the programs. So in March of 2020, the world turned upside down, and we found ourselves living through a global pandemic that is yet to end, and the first one in more than a century. Just 2 months later, George Floyd became one of the many Black Americans that have been brutally murdered, sparking protests across the country in support of Black lives. Yet amid the pain of brutal injustice, we have hope. In early 2021, Vice President Kamala Harris became the first African American, Asian American, and female vice president to be sworn into office in the US. So the combined impacts of the pandemic and ongoing racism sparked institutions, offices, students, organizations, and others to take a stand on racism. It sparked individuals to confront our own biases, and for many of us to imagine what our role can be in creating change. The design professions are insisting on change. I'm an architect, and I don't know if you've seen the AIA Guides for Equitable Practice. They cover a range of topics. They've been updated in December of 2020, and we'll soon add a new topic that's focused on higher education, which is really our talk today. I'm proud to have contributed to their realization. Other individual architecture firms are sharing what they're learning. The Association of Collegiate Schools of Architecture, ACSA, which supports kind of faculty, have been looking at where are the women faculty. They've also created a series called Where Are My People, which focuses on where are BIPOC faculty. For instance, just 3% of the tenured faculty in schools of architecture are Black. And this is just one of the many inequities that highlight this need for change. I'm going to hand it over to Susan Rogers, who will do a brief introduction and tell you a little bit about her work.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Hello? Oh. Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Rogers, Associate Professor at the College of Architecture and also the Director of the Community Design Resource Center. Oh, I lost the share screen. Thank you. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the University of Houston and our response as an institution to where we are as a society. Certainly, many colleges and universities across the country have been doing a lot of self-reflection on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how to change that kind of moving forward. I was part of the task force at the University of Houston that created our diversity, equity, and inclusion task force, as well as Sarah White, a student who's here today with us. So we started by understanding where we were as a college by collecting data and demographics, administering a survey to faculty, students, staff, and alumni to get a better understanding really of the issues and what were the priorities that everyone cared about most. We received 300 responses, most of them from students. Based on the survey, an open letter created by a coalition of very active students called CARE, the Coalition for Anti-Racist Education at our college, to begin identifying action items. Our committee comprised of faculty and students, but we also brought in other stakeholders to create a shared set of goals. This included CARE members, alumni, community members, and other faculty. Our action items fell into kind of 5 categories: the college, student experience and support, curriculum transformation, faculty diversity, and community engagement. And for each goal, we established a set of metrics so that there could be a way to measure our progress over time. The data, if you will, reinforced what we already knew, that the student body at University of Houston has grown increasingly diverse, as have the students in our college and our city overall. University of Houston is a federally designated Hispanic serving institution, and you can see in our college, 42% of our students are Hispanic or Latinx. Yet the diversity of our faculty by both gender and race and ethnicity is not representative of our student body, neither by gender nor by race and ethnicity. If we look at this in a more detailed analysis, it illustrates that we have substantial work to do at the University of Houston to address this disparity. For example, women comprise less than 1/3 of our entire faculty, and BIPOC faculty represent just 25%. Further, the majority of both the female and BIPOC faculty are adjunct or non-ranked, making their positions less permanent. But at the same time, the diversity of our leadership is comprised of almost, well, exactly all white men. They hold all of the dean-appointed faculty leadership positions. This includes our directors and coordinators, and it's a total of 15 dean-appointed positions. So between 2013 and 2019, our college added 15 white faculty members, but only 9 BIPOC faculty members. We're not making progress. And if you look at the largest program, as Donna pointed out, our undergraduate architecture program, which serves approximately 70% of our student body, the full-time faculty, of the full-time faculty that teach in this program, 20% are female, 20% are BIPOC, but maybe most importantly, only 7% of those faculty identify as Hispanic or Latinx, even while, as I pointed out, 42% of our students identify as such. So while we teach, learn, live in a diverse city, we all know that there is real and significant difference between having diversity and attaining justice, equity, and inclusivity. And while our city is diverse, we remain separated by wealth, by ethnicity, by race, and by politics. We believe we have to move towards systemic change, transforming power, the systems that support that power, and understand the difference between equity and equality, between justice and diversity, if we are really going to create lasting and sustainable, and most importantly, systemic change. Thank you. Donna, turn it back over to you.
Great. Thank you, Susan. And thank you for the entire DEI task force for that report. That work can be found on our College of Architecture Design website, and we'll put it in the chat. As Susan mentioned, many of our faculty are insisting on change. In an open letter in June 15th, 2020, in recognition of the crisis that was impacting us all, a number of faculty asked that we put our students first and that we work together to support one another during these unprecedented times. Unfortunately, our letter was dismissed. The students, as mentioned, are also insisting on change. They came together to create CARE, the Coalition for an Anti-Racist Education, and in their July 2020 open letter, they highlighted 16 demands. One of those demands, in this letter signed by 200 students, demanded the extraction of white supremacy from our curriculum. So it was in this space that the Design Justice course emerged in conversation with faculty across the programs in our college in response to student demands and our current situation, as a way for us all to at least test new pedagogies and spaces for learning and teaching. We focused on ensuring that faculty and students learned together, that we created a safe space, and it was interdisciplinary, that we looked at multiple scales and topics. We believe this course was a space where hard conversations could begin, but certainly not end. And we felt so strongly that this course was needed that we advocated multiple times for it to be added to the schedule and agreed to teach it without additional pay or teaching credit. So we worked together as a team of 5 faculty to identify materials, some of which have been talked about already, that would spark dialogue and new ideas about design justice and bring new voices to the question of design. In fact, the chapters in the book Design Justice by Sasha Constanza Chalk really gave us a framework for our explorations. We also explored other media, the firm Urbanized, and an inspiring talk by the Nigerian author Adichie. We looked at toolkits and manifestos. One we found that was particularly powerful was from Design Can, that reminds us to champion underrepresented talent. And at times we may need to stand aside to create space. And most importantly, that we all need to be reminded to always listen. All of the course content was explored at multiple scales, from that of the city to the neighborhood, to the block, to the building, to the object. We used a digital whiteboard to collaborate and share our work, organize ideas, and create a kind of a free space. The whiteboard was also a great place to explore hard questions like what is design injustice, and ensure that even those who might be uncomfortable speaking up in class had a place to meaningfully engage in the conversation. We could also share perspectives on the readings asynchronously, so after class, before class, when you thought of something that had been said in class. We learned from each other. Faculty learned from the students, and we were all exposed to new ideas, new projects, new design practices. One of the most significant beauties of teaching is that we learn as much from our students as they learn from us. And while Susan and her work with the Community Design Resource Center have been working with diverse communities for years/decades, I came to this class with limited experience. I came in order to kind of learn myself, and we felt that we needed to build a shared vocabulary in order to have these conversations. So the main bulk of the student work was investigating terms, and we paired them up in diverse teams to develop and look at, define, investigate a term across the semester. And they did much of this work, again, on that whiteboard.
So Donna and I, yes, Donna and I will both confirm that the best part of teaching at the University of Houston is certainly our students. They've illustrated great resiliency over the last 18 months, as they consistently do, even in normal times. The many student organizations, particularly this year, have helped connect students to resources, to active practices, and really to the politics of the college. And their voices have become increasingly strong, and their requests, as you've seen in the care letter, kind of demanding to be heard and becoming advocates for both themselves and the students that will come after them. We also just want to share a really amazing project that our students have been doing over the course of the pandemic. It's the Sorry, I'm in Studio podcast. You can find it on Spotify. And the series of interviews are really just amazing. Sarah White, who again is here today, is involved in this, and Anne-Elisabeth Baker, who you'll hear from in just a moment, was one of the featured interviewees, as well as Donna and myself. And it's just an amazingly professional production, just incredible. And I'll turn it back over to Donna.
Yeah, well, I'll share. I listened to the podcast of Susan Rogers talking about the CDRC this morning at the gym, and it was fantastic. And I just want to connect Betsy particularly to that. I think your work is can really connect and network. So I enjoyed that this morning. So as we learned from each other, we all benefited from thinking about design and the design professions and their role in either upholding racism or creating equity. These conversations impacted the conversations we were having with others and in other classes. So today, we've asked 4 students, 4 undergraduate students, 3 from the seminar course and 1 from a design studio, to share their work and thoughts with you this morning. So I'm going to turn it over to Anne-Elisabeth.
And I am a 4th year industrial design major, which is product design for those that are unfamiliar. And I'm also minoring in energy and sustainability. So my motivation for joining this class was all started because I worked on writing the open letter this past summer to our administration. And I really hoped to be able to improve both our college as a whole, as well as our industrial design program. And so this class, I was really hoping to be able to educate myself on these issues, to better intelligently and respectfully articulate my thoughts and be able to have these conversations with other like-minded individuals. So it was a wonderful experience, and I'm really looking forward to sharing a couple of things that I worked on during this past semester with you today. So at the beginning of the semester, I was paired with an architecture student, which was really wonderful because we came at all of these discussions with very different spatial perspectives. And so we were tasked with identifying a term that we wanted to research throughout the course of the semester. So we were interested in equity-centered design, human-centered design, anti-racist design, and within all those topics, we felt like the term ethical design really encompassed those terms, and that's what we chose to research. So that term being design made with the intent to do good. So this chart was really interesting and kind of helped to lead us as we did our research over the semester, because it reinforces how ethical design prioritizes respecting the human experience, which I think is something that we're all striving for in the design process, regardless of whether we're in architecture or design or another adjacent field. We also talked more about the designer of Victor Popenick and his work striving towards more socially and ecologically responsible design. So this chart was a great explanation of how inclusive that we strive to be during the design process, including not only people from other fields, but also those who we are designing for. We also spoke about the topic of environmental justice. And for those that may not be familiar with the term, the EPA's definition is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. So we explored how the environmental justice movement parallels with the ethical design movement and the kind of grassroots activism that's taking place as people are striving, speaking up against human rights violations and striving towards more representation. So my partner, Roberto, who's architecture major, created this next slide to contrast, can you switch slides? To contrast how design can be used as either a tool for discrimination or as a tool for connection. So as an industrial design major, I am fascinated by design on the object scale, and more specifically, how we can design more ethical products. So that process is, of course, very complex, as we have to consider material sustainability and sourcing, manufacturing processes, and those who are exploited in the supply chain, just to name a few considerations. So it's a very multifaceted thing to study and try to look further into. So I just wanted to highlight a project that I've been working on at the University of Houston that is a practical application of sustainable community-oriented design, and that is Precious Plastic, which is a grassroots recycling initiative that started in the Netherlands back in 2013 and has since grown globally to many countries all over the world. And it's basically a series of 4 recycling machines that are open source. So all the information for how to build them is online. And this enables people all over the world to create workspaces where you can recycle your own plastic at a small scale. So we have a few examples of the kinds of products that can be created using these machines. So for a College of Architecture like our own, this allows us to create valuable materials that then we can turn into building materials or use to create products. So we can injection mold things, we can create furniture, we can create vessels of different kinds. But ultimately, we can educate people and bring them together and talk about sustainability and the environment and our impact and how we can strive to be more equitable, ethical designers. So at the University of Houston, we have created our own little recycling workspace. And so I've been working on through a university research fellowship this summer to establish that workspace. And our hope is that students will be able to come in this fall, bring their own plastic, and be able to shred it and upcycle it into valuable new materials for their projects. So with that, I will pass it on to the wonderful Sarah White.
Hello. Thank you so much, Anne-Elisabeth. I'm Sarah White. I am a 4th year interior architecture student. And I guess to start off, I want to talk about why I joined Design Justice as a class. Mainly, it was because of everything that was happening at our school. I wanted to be more engaged in our community. The first thing I did was I joined DEI, the task force, which was a really, really great experience for me, of course, but I wasn't quite satisfied once I had finished it. I wasn't, one, satisfied with the avenues that the school was giving me to remain involved, but two, I also wasn't quite satisfied with my own performance in it. I know that I would always hesitate to talk or to speak my mind because, I was surrounded by all of these wonderful professors who I looked up to, and I would always ask myself, what could I really add to this conversation? So this class was a great opportunity to just build my own confidence to speak eloquently about the things that I cared about. So my term was participatory environmental design. It's not a textbook definition term. You won't find it in the dictionary. There were no Google Trends for it. It was actually a mishmash of two things me and my partner were very passionate about: participatory design and environmental design. And when we brought this up to our professors, they had told us that, something that we can do is let you guys find your own definition. So that's exactly what we did. We made up our whole new term, and that was really great. Next thing that we had to do was think of what does participatory environmental design actually look like on the product scale, the scale of the home, and scale of the neighborhood. We were imagining about collaborating with young fashion designers to create clothes or accessories that utilize recyclable or sustainable materials, means of productions, and transportation. On the scale of a home, talking with parents to create a house that was designed to give easier access to children to the outdoors, but also allowed for a visual connection with your parents to ensure their safety. And on the scale of a neighborhood, working with BIPOC individuals whose historical neighborhoods were being exploited environmentally, and how they wanted to preserve and develop those neighborhoods and their culture. Next, we were looking at precedences that we felt like really encapsulated this idea for us. And we found one called El Hicurito School, which is a school in Nicaragua that not only worked with an architectural reform, but also worked with community learning centers, local builders of the actual area, great engineers, the families, and the affected students who would be going to this school. And it was even crowdfunded at the start. It was this great worldwide project that touched so many people and was really uplifting to us, as we really thought that we just made this whole concept up. But I think one of the most uplifting and inspiring days, and also my favorite day, was the day that each of the students, each of my peers, were able to teach each other about things that, or groups that they found to be really exciting. And to our surprise, a lot of them actually had really similar ideals and values as participatory environmental design. Even in the class, we saw these values reflected back to us, and it made me really realize that even if you don't have a perfect word or label for the things that you care about, doesn't mean that there aren't other people all over the world that care just as much as you do. So I really encourage everyone, if you have something that you care about, don't be afraid to share it. Don't be afraid to talk about it and make noise. So moving on, I am going into my senior thesis, and I really wanted to figure out a way to integrate the things I learned in design justice with my senior thesis. And one of the things that I felt like was a main takeaway for me was the difference between hearing and listening. Hearing is a very passive act. It is the act of your ears and brain receiving and processing sound, while listening is really active. It's the conscious act of engaging with the meaning behind those sounds. And from that, I really wanted to tackle foster care and the foster care system, specifically how it treats youths who are aging out. Less than 10% of all adoptions are of teens, age 13 through 17, and about 23,000 foster youths age out of the system nationwide. Within the first 4 years of aging out, over 15% of these foster youths either end up with no earnings, experience homelessness, or end up incarcerated. Within Houston, there are a few responses to these problems. One are transitional living centers. These are basically centers for foster youths who are in danger of or have already outgrown the foster care system. That being said, only one exists in Houston. It's in the Montrose Midtown area, which is a rather well-off area in Houston. And we have over 1,400 foster youths who are trying to get into this system. The Hayes Center, which is the center in Houston, while it does tackle homelessness through bridge housing programs, the center itself does not have the space to house all of these foster youths. 1 in 5 foster youth end up experiencing homelessness within the first year of aging out. So I really want to end my presentation with a quote from a former foster youth. I really don't want everyone to walk away thinking that, this is all that there is. I don't want any person who, for almost 18 years of their life, has never had a single adult really listen to them think that this is all I have for me. This is all I have going for me. So I really wanted to end it off with this quote that I think really encapsulates the feelings that former foster youths and foster care children in general feel. Living through COVID reminds me of foster care. Social isolation, constant changes, and a lack of control. So now I'll hand it off to Miranda.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Miranda Gonzalez. I am a fifth-year architecture student, and I will be presenting a project I did this past spring. The project was based in Houston's Greater Third Ward, and it included for us to create 20 housing units. And as a studio, we began by analyzing the various ordering systems of the third ward. Some of these included the demographic, the geographic, and value systems, and we were also able to talk to a lot of the leaders of the community. Then later, each student was able to choose their own site, and the site that I chose lays in the neighborhood of Malone Park. One of the bigger issues with this area is the lack of housing and the vast amount of empty lots, which allow for some crime to happen. And similar aspects are able to be seen all throughout the third ward, and much of this happened because of the lack of investment in the area, which led to a loss of housing, and then later led to a loss of community and a loss of security. The site that I chose lays specifically on the corner of Tom and Tire Wester, and some of the issues with the site itself are a lack of physical connection to Malone Park and a lack of walkability. To solve these issues, I thought it was important to bring in an element that was already present in the neighborhood itself, and this was the porch. And to me, design justice means preserving existing design elements of a neighborhood, especially when building new construction. And I think the porch would facilitate this idea. But the porch also symbolizes the idea of community and eyes on the street. So reinserting the porch in Malone Park would allow for the community around the area to be reignited. The lack of homes in the area creates a loss of the porch and therefore a loss of community. So I propose to create higher density housing that would increase the amount of porches in Malone Park and would therefore activate the community. Within the project that I proposed, there are 3 unit types. And when speaking to a lot of the community leaders, they talked about people who were originally from the third ward were unable to come back into the third ward. So having different unit types would facilitate this issue. And the porches are arranged so that they are on the edge of the street. And one of the units shifts, creating these covered pathways that connect back to Malone Park. The first unit type is the family unit, and it includes 2 porches, with the porch on the second floor being more of a viewing porch. The second unit type is the work-live unit. The porch space has been replaced by a commercial space to further facilitate activation with the street. And then the last unit type is the individual unit, and these are 2 units stacked. In each one of the units, there's a visual connection on both floors, and this visual and physical connection is facilitated through the use of the porch and would allow for the community to be activated and engaged. So if with 20 units, the community of Malone Park would reignite, the question would be, how would 70 units affect the community of the Third Ward as a whole? Thank you so much for your time, and now I will pass it on to Jolene.
Hello, my name is Jolene Limqueco, and I'm a 4th-year architecture major at the University of Houston. My heart is racing right now. There are a lot of amazing people and listeners here today with us, and I'll be honest, I was scared that I really didn't belong in this crowd and my words weren't worth any of your time. But my professor saw something special in me and my peers here today and gave us this wonderful opportunity to speak to you. And seeing the chat, it makes me really emotional. So in the summer of 2020, like Donna said before, many passionate students, including myself and Sarah White and Anne-Elisabeth here, got together and we wrote the open letter. This letter was addressed to the dean of our college, discussing ways that we really wanted our school to better support our BIPOC and minority students and faculty. We touched on how the diversity of our faculty didn't really match the rich diversity of our student body and UH itself. We brought up ways that our curriculum favored privileged students of higher income, and we stated how we wanted our studio projects to be more geared towards understanding and helping our communities, such as Third Ward, rather than designing another luxury building. Ultimately, this letter showed everyone that the students and the faculty really desperately needed a safe space to talk about these topics. The final assignment of the Design Justice class was an essay, but I wanted to capture how deeply I felt and how strongly students experiencing design school during this time feels. So I decided that an essay couldn't really portray that. Inspired by the open letter, and after taking a calculated risk, I wrote my final essay in the form of a letter poem instead, and I will read it to you guys. Dear professors, I found myself writing and rewriting this over and over again, typing and deleting, muting and unmuting, drawing and erasing. I wanted to poetically align myself with the moon, waxing and waning, pulling and pushing the tides, and regularly growing. I was growing and shrinking instead. My room seemed to grow every time we said goodbye and left the class call, as if I grew bigger when we talked and shrunk to accommodate the loneliness of my bedroom. As if I grew bigger and felt that this room was too small for me, as if any room was too small for me, as if I could be out there in the world living right now, doing design, helping people, saving lives. As if I could be some childhood superhero and my sidekick was my pen and my paper. And I sit here, typing, frustrated with what the world is, but I learned that it's okay to be angry. It's okay to be upset with ourselves, and it's okay to feel scared. In medias res, in the midst of this pandemic, amid this nationwide awakening of inequity and injustice, amid this worldwide hate towards our friends and people who look like me, amid this social loneliness and isolation, I was afraid I would become numb to another school shooting in the headlines, to another fellow Asian being blamed for this damn pandemic, to another police killing a Black man, to another death. I remember seeing the fear in my mother's eyes while she read the headlines, watching her shrink into the couch as she tried to make her house the world that we can stay in and be safe. A world where a woman that looks like her wouldn't be threatened or shot. I always felt a little scared to unmute myself in class and say my thoughts. I always felt a little scared that I wouldn't really contribute to the dialogue. Many students like myself came into this class looking for refuge, looking for safety in our conversations and safety in our readings, but I think that people are just trying to find safety in spaces and amid this chaos shrink themselves to accommodate for another injustice they can't solve, another wicked problem they can't approach, and another solution they can't think of. How many times have you seen a BIPOC student walk as if they were concerned how the ground would feel about their footsteps? How many times have you heard a female student start a sentence with sorry? I don't want to shrink in order to feel safe, so I'm fortunate that our conversations weren't tailored to smother fires, but rather to start them. I'm fortunate that our dialogues were about shattering the familiar rather than shrinking for comfort. And I'm fortunate that I feel a little uncomfortable in this class. I feel like when we're taught design, we end up shrinking ourselves, but when we learn to design, we grow just a little bigger. Writing this, I feel a little taller, knowing I'll be closer to designing spaces that are less distant or sacred and more human. Because these spaces belong to us, are for us, and are from us. Love, Jolene Limqueco. Thank you so much.
Well, I'm not sure I can share anything better than what our students are doing and writing and saying. Thank you.